Down there, life continues. The traffic is awful, stocks go on trading, and Star Trek is still showing.
Good day to you, grade 8 learners. Welcome to today's Natural Sciences lesson brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education. My name is Dawezinhle Liwayo. In our lesson today, we want to look at types of microorganisms and harmful microorganisms, right? So, a new interesting term there, the first half of our naming there, micro. So I want to talk more about these microorganisms, right? So we're saying at the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain what microorganisms are, okay? And then also, you should be able to convert micrometers to millimeters. And I believe already when you see the word meters, you are now thinking of size. It has to do with the length or some unit of measure. So we shall talk about these units called micrometers, and we're going to convert them to millimeters. And then you should also be able to use a scale to determine the real size of a microorganism. Okay, we shall see how we handle that. And then also you should be able to use a scale to determine the magnification of a micrograph, right? We'll talk about these terms in our lesson. Okay, and then you should be able to list the different types of microorganisms. So we're going to classify them, we put them in different groups, and then we'll be able to list them by the end of our lesson. And then be able to describe each type of microorganism, to distinguish between the different types of our microorganisms. And then remember we said we want to look at the harmful microorganisms. So you should be able to list the diseases that are caused by our microorganisms. I believe some of them we are familiar with them. So however, we should be able to know the type of microorganism, the diseases that they actually also cause, and then describe the diseases that are caused by the microorganisms. And lastly, we're going to distinguish between the ways in which our microorganisms are harmful. And we're saying all this is taken from our CAPS document, page 39. Right. So we're saying, what is our pre-knowledge? Our pre-knowledge is on the classification of living things. And remember, when we talk of living things, mostly what comes to mind to us are the plants and the animals. Whenever we talk about living things, people talk of the plants and the animals, the things that we can easily see. However, today we want to talk about these, what we call microorganisms. So we want to see what kind of class of living things are they. So remember what you learned about classification. When you classify your living things, you start with kingdoms, you go to the phylum, to the class, the order, the family, the genus, and our species. And we know that as humans, we are under the Homo sapiens. Okay, so remember all that section when it comes to our classification. So we're saying our microorganisms, they are also a specific type or a specific class of living organisms. Right. However, to kickstart our lesson, we're going to have an interesting baseline on something that we once experienced in the previous years, something that was experienced by the whole world. And we're going to have a basic idea of what we're talking about, these microorganisms. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about COVID-19. Remember the coronavirus or the coronavirus disease of 2019. We're going to use this as part of our baseline since we're talking about these microorganisms. And yes, our COVID-19 was indeed and is indeed a microorganism. So I want us to go over this baseline. We're going to read through this passage which talks about our COVID-19. So can you listen, pick out some information, and after we go through this passage, I'm going to give you some questions that are based on our COVID-19. All right. And as I said, it is a typical microorganism, and not just a typical microorganism, it is a disease causing microorganism. So let's go over the passage. I'll read through, pay attention, and pick out some information there. Right. So we're saying a virus is a kind of germ. I'm sure we're familiar with this word germ, right? A virus is a kind of germ that can make people sick. There are many kinds of viruses around us, including the common cold. The coronavirus disease 2019 is a virus that was first found in Wuhan, in China. I believe we're familiar with that information. It causes lung respiratory illnesses in people. A lung illness makes it hard to breathe and get oxygen into the body. Now, COVID-19 can be spread from person to person. This can happen when a person sneezes or coughs, and tiny bits of liquid respiratory droplets, they come out of their mouth. If you are standing close to the person within 6 feet, you might then breathe it in. It might be possible to get COVID-19 by touching a hard surface or object that has the virus on it. This could happen if you touch the virus and then touch your mouth, your nose, or possibly your eyes. The virus may be able to stay on a surface for a few days. Then COVID-19 can cause lung respiratory illness that might be mild, serious, or even deadly. Now, the symptoms usually start between 2 to 14 days after a person is infected. Symptoms include fever, cough, and shortness of breath, that is hard to breathe. Most people who get the virus have a mild case. Mild means not very strong. Right. So this is a typical extract on COVID-19 which we experienced, which the entire whole world experienced, and was saying this is a typical microorganism, and we want to talk more about these kind of microorganisms. Right. I'm sure you heard what we read there. Now this is the time for you to attempt our typical question that are based on our extract. Right. Now for this section, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Right, welcome back. Welcome back. I believe we have answered those questions. Now remember to join us on the WhatsApp platform 079 578 2908. So as we go over the lesson, if you're having challenges, can you send your questions there? And when we're doing our activities, just feel free to send your solutions there. So let's start with the first part. What part of the body is most affected by COVID-19? And I'm sure you were able to get that one. It is the lungs. Okay. And then we're saying, how does a coronavirus spread from one person to another person? Right. Let's go back to our paragraph there to answer that one. Okay. Remember we said our COVID-19, follow that sentence. COVID-19 can spread from person to person, and this can happen when a person sneezes or coughs, and then we're saying tiny bits of liquid, that is the respiratory droplets, okay, they come out of their mouth, and we're saying if you're standing close now, if you're standing close to the person, you might then breathe it in. And hence, remember the concept of putting on the masks. All right. Why are we talking about this? Remember, we were saying you couldn't see the virus, but we put on the masks. And hence, we are saying we're talking about microorganisms in our lesson today, and hence we are trying to bring this closer to one of the microorganisms that was really a problem to all of us, the whole world. Okay, so we're saying this is one way in which our COVID could be spread, and then the other way, when you touch, okay, when you touch the virus, okay, and then what happens? You're touching material, you're touching a table, you're touching anything, and then what happens is that then you touch your own mouth, you touch your nose, and possibly your eyes. And then we're saying that is how the virus could spread, and hence the importance of what we use to sanitize. I hope you're still sanitizing your hands, keeping your hands clean of these microorganisms. Right. So these are the ways in which our COVID-19 could actually spread. Right, let us proceed. Now, the last part, the list, the three symptoms of coronavirus, saying fever, cough, and shortness of breath, that is difficulty in breathing. Okay, so this is a typical microorganism. So we're saying our coronavirus is a typical microorganism, which is our topic for today. We want to talk about these microorganisms. What are they? Okay, and we're saying some of them can cause disease. In other words, they are harmful. Okay, they can be harmful to plants. They can be harmful even to us, people and animals. So this is the center of our lesson today, microorganisms. So let us begin by defining a few terms. The first term we want to define is microorganisms. We're saying these are living organisms that are too small with the naked eye, right? So you cannot see them. Just like the COVID-19, we could not see it, but we just put on masks, hoping that we do not get infected. Right, so we cannot see them by our naked eye. Then we have the term to magnify. We're saying to magnify is to make something appear larger than its actual size. So in other words, these microorganisms, we can view them under good instruments, under proper instruments, and we increase their size. Though we cannot see them by the naked eye, we can make them bigger by magnifying them. Right, then we talk of what we call unicellular. Okay, so when we're saying something is unicellular, we're saying it consists of one cell. Okay, I'm sure we know what cells are. We have typical animal and plant cells and so on, isn't it? So we're saying when we're saying something is unicellular, it consists of a single cell. And then we have multicellular. Okay, this is something that consists of many cells. Right, take note of these terms. And then our last term that we'll define is the pathogens. Okay, these are microorganisms that cause diseases. Okay, most of the times you talk of germs, right? So these are what we call pathogens. The one which you normally refer to as germs, we refer to them as pathogens. So these are our harmful microorganisms, right? These are the terms that we will be looking at. Right. Now, if you look at that image now, we have an image of a typical microorganism. Remember we said we cannot see them by the naked eye, but when we magnify, we can see typical microorganisms. Quite an interesting image that we have there, right? We'll not talk much about that microorganism, right? But we need to appreciate something about these microorganisms, right? Number one, our microorganisms were saying these are the smallest living things. You cannot see them by the naked eye unless you magnify them, okay? So they are very small. And then we're saying we can also refer to them as microbes. So whenever you see the term microbes, know that you're talking about these microorganisms, right? Number three, what do we know about them? They carry out life processes. We've got one exception, the virus. We'll talk more about it. Okay, so they do carry out our life processes. Remember the life processes there. Okay, and then we're saying these microorganisms, they can be found in different habitats, including the soil, okay? Water, the one that you're observing there is found in water, okay? This typically, you find it in water. You can find them in air, okay? And you can find them even in our bodies, these microorganisms, and even in the bodies of animals. So basically, you can find them almost anywhere. All right, so they live in different habitats. Okay, and we said the first point, remember our major point, you cannot see them by the naked eye unless you magnify them and create an image like the one that you are observing there. Right, and since they are small, their unit of measure, we use micrometers. We'll talk about these micrometers, how you can convert them to millimeters, the ones which we normally use, right? So we shall see how we convert them into these millimeters or micrometers. Right. Still talking about our microorganisms. Okay, remember we said they do carry out the life processes. Okay, and one of the life processes now we're saying when they feed differently. Okay, some of the microorganisms they are producers. Okay, meaning they can manufacture their own food, and that is through photosynthesis. Okay, a typical example we have the algae. I'm sure we're familiar with the algae. When you go to the water bodies, you see that green layer and so on. You see the algae, they can photosynthesize. And then we also have what we call the cyanobacteria. Don't worry about these big terms at the moment, grade 8, but just know them. You have fun with your friends and you talk about these terms. Today I learned about cyanobacteria. They are microorganisms. They can produce their own food, right? So just recall those terms. And then we're saying some of them are consumers. Okay, remember the consumers? It means now they feed on other organisms, right? So we now know our microorganisms, some they produce their food, others they are consumers, right? Look at that interesting image. Okay, let it play once more. I want you to know it started as a single microorganism, and look at how it is increasing. The population of that microorganism is increasing. Right, what do we learn from that? Okay, we're saying our microorganisms, they can grow very fast. Okay, some of our microorganisms in less than an hour, In less than an hour, they can actually double their mass. They can grow very fast. Okay? And also, what we know about our microorganisms is that they do not need, some of them, they do not need the male and the female for them to reproduce. Okay? For them to produce their young. Okay? They simply divide. They simply divide when they reproduce. Let's look at this image. You can see you have a single microorganism there, and then it divides. Bam! It divides. Now you have two microorganisms, and they continue dividing like that, and that is how they reproduce. And there is no need for them to have a male and a female so that they can have their offspring. They can just divide. Okay, an interesting process. You learn about it in higher grades when you do your life science. What will be really happening there? So you see, there is so many interesting things that we are learning about these microorganisms. Though we cannot see them, we said we can magnify them, make them bigger, and then we can see how they actually behave. Right? So now, looking at our microorganisms, we said we can magnify them so that we can see them. So we use this instrument. Do you see this instrument? Okay, we call that instrument a microscope. I believe some of us will came across our microscope. So we use our microscope to view our microorganisms, magnify them, they look bigger, and then we can see how they actually behave. Okay, and remember we said when we measure their size, we measure their size in micrometers. That is the symbol for micro there. Can you see that? Okay, so their size is in micrometers. We use a microscope to view them, and then their size, micrometers. Don't forget that. Right, and then we're saying 1,000 micrometers make 1 millimeter. Right, check note. 1,000 micrometers, they give you 1 millimeter. That is the relationship that we have. Right, so let's look at this conversion. I want you to master this. It's not really difficult. Just master this. Just pay attention. Right, now, if I have a micrometer and I want to convert it to a millimeter, right, what do? I will divide that by 1,000. Right. So what does it mean? It means my 1 micrometer, I will divide it by 1,000. That will give me 0.001 millimeters. You can punch in those values into your calculator. So it means 1 micrometer is 0.001 millimeters. Is that making sense? Right. And then if I have a millimeter and I want to convert it to a micrometer, what do? I multiply, right? I multiply by 1,000. So I have 1 millimeter, I multiply it by 1,000, I get 1,000 micrometers. So that is generally how we are going to convert our units. Right, I hope it is making sense. Right, so now remember we said when we view our microorganisms, we use our microscope, and when we use that microscope, we have an enlarged view of our microorganism. It becomes magnified. Right, so now when we get that magnified image, we call it a micrograph. Okay, and we're saying from that micrograph, you should be able to determine the actual size. Okay, so we get an enlarged image, which is magnified. All right, and from that magnified image, we should be able to get the actual size. Are you getting it, grade 8? The actual size of our microorganism. Right, so now how do we get the actual size of our microorganism? We use the following formula. Take note of this formula, please. Can you take note of this formula? We're saying the actual size of your microorganism is equal to the drawing size, that is the magnified, the image from your micrograph, okay, divided by the magnification. We're saying how many times did you increase the size of your microorganism until you made that image. Right. Let's look at a typical example where we can apply this formula. Right. Take note of that formula. Right. The question is saying determine the actual size of a microorganism if its magnified size on a micrograph is 32,5 millimeters. So take note, its magnified size is 32,5 millimeters. This is the one which has been increased the size. Okay? The picture that you view, we have increased the size. We have magnified it, and it is 32,5. But we're saying this is not the actual size. All right? And then the magnification is 2,000 times. Okay, we have enlarged our image 2,000 times to get to a value of 32,5 millimeters so that we can see the image of the object. So the question is, what is the actual size of our microorganism? So they're straightforward. Don't stress, don't think too much. Remember the formula. Actual size is equal to what? Is equal to the drawing size divided by the magnification. And all that information you have in your question. There is your magnification. You can see that. There is your drawing size. So it's 32,5 divided by 2,000. Use your calculator there, and what do we get? 0,001625 millimeters. And we're saying this is the actual size of your microorganism. All right? Remember, we can express the lengths or the sizes of our microorganisms in micrometers. And we said, if you have your value in millimeters, how do you express it in micrometers? You multiply by a what? 1,000, and that will give us 1,625 micrometers. That is the actual size of our microorganism. I hope it is making sense. Right, at this point, I'm going to give you just 1 minute for you to take down that example. 1 minute. Welcome back. Welcome back. Right. So remember, we're saying you can communicate on 079 578 2908 if you're having challenges. So remember, this is our important formula, right? And in our mathematics, we always say change of subject of the formula. So using that same formula, you should be able to calculate the magnification by making magnification the subject of the formula. And that will give us what? Our magnification, can you take note of the formula again? Magnification is going to be equal to what? It's going to be equal to the drawing size divided by the actual size. Right, so that will give you how many times was that object actually increased in size. for you to generate the image. And we said the image that you observe there of your microorganism, we call it a micrograph. Right? I hope it is making sense. Now let us proceed. Okay, now in determining the actual size of your microorganism, okay, you can also be given your micrograph. You can look at that image there. I hope you can see that image. That is an enlarged or a magnified image of a microorganism, right? We said our microorganism, you cannot see them by the naked eye. So definitely that size has been enlarged. So take note at the bottom there, you are given a bar scale. Look at that bar scale. That bar scale is given in nanometers. Okay, nm there at the bottom there. I hope you can see there that nm. Right. If you're given such a micrograph, you can be expected also to estimate the real size, the actual size of an organism. So of a microorganism. So how do you go about that? Right, just follow me. It's just a few simple steps. Right. So step number one. Okay, you're going to use your ruler and then you measure the length of that scale bar. You see that scale bar? You measure its length. Okay, I'll assume a value there. All right, I'll say that scale bar has a length of 1 centimeter. Take note of that. Write it somewhere. We will assume it's 1 centimeter. Okay, and then step number two, you're going to use your ruler and measure the length of a microorganism in the micrograph. Okay, let's say you use your ruler and you measure the length there of that one. Okay, you measure its length from there to there. Right, let's say you get a length of 5 centimeters. Take note of that. I'll put 5 centimeters here. Right, step number three, what do you do to get the actual length? Right, you divide the length of your organism. Remember, that is my 5 centimeters. Okay, I'm going to divide 5 centimeters by the length of the scale bar. The scale bar, we say it is 1 centimeter, so I divide that by 1 centimeter. And last but not least, you multiply your answer. We divide that, we multiply the answer there by the length printed on the scale bar. Do you see the length printed on the scale bar is 200 nanometers. So I multiply by 200 nanometers. Okay, so this will give me 1000 nanometers. And we're saying that will be the actual length, the real size length of my microorganism. Right. I hope you mastered those steps. That is how we obtain an estimate of the real size of our microorganism. So just remember, those are the steps that we take. Okay, let us proceed. Right. So remember we said we want to talk about our microorganisms. Okay. First point that we need to master now, we have 4 different kinds of our microorganisms. Right. The first one, we have the viruses, the one which we introduced our lesson with. Right. Our viruses, they cannot carry out all the 7 life processes. Okay, and as such, they are sometimes referred to as non-living. We won't go much deep about that. They are sometimes referred to as non-living because they only reproduce. They do not carry out the rest of the life processes. Okay, so number one, we're saying we have our viruses. Number two, we have bacteria. Okay, our bacteria, we're saying they are made of one cell only. And remember, in our definition of terms, we said that is unicellular. So these are unicellular organisms. And then we have fungi. I hope you're taking note of these ones. So we have 1, 2, 3 now. We have our fungi, right? And our fungi, we're saying they are multicellular. Okay. Examples, we have molds, mushrooms, okay, and toadstools. These are typical examples of our fungi. We're going to look at a single one of them as our lesson progresses. And then lastly, we have what we call protists. Okay, our protists, like the bacteria, they consist of one cell. Okay, but we're saying they can be complex. Right, so these are the general microorganisms that we have: virus, bacteria, fungi, and protists. And remember, we said as they are, some of them can be harmful, some of them can cause diseases, and we said we shall look at them in our lesson today. Right. I hope you have taken note of the important sections there. These are our microorganisms which we cannot see by the naked eye. Right. At this stage, I'm just going to give you a small activity on what we have covered so far. Right. For this activity, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Right, welcome back. Welcome back. Let us look at the questions. Remember, I said you can post your solutions on 079 578 2908. Right, so we're saying name the 4 types of our microorganisms. We said we have the viruses, we have the bacteria, protists, and also the fungi. Right, I hope you were able to get that one. And then determine the magnification of a microscope. If the actual size of a microorganism is 71,5 micrometers and its magnified size is 7,15 millimeters. Remember the important thing is our formula. I hope you still remember the formula. Magnification is the size, the drawing size divided by the actual size. So there you are told the actual size of the microorganism is 71 micro, 71,5 micrometers, right? And then the magnified size is 7,15 millimeters. So you can see you have to divide. However, the units are different. So you cannot divide if the units are different. So ensure that you convert your units to one particular unit and then you do your division. So for example, our 71,5 micrometers, we can convert it to millimeters. And we said our micrometers to millimeters, what do? We divide by 1,000. So 71,5 divided by 1,000, we get 0,0715 millimeters. Right, those are 0,0. So now we can substitute that value into our calculation. Right, magnified size 7,15 millimeters. Actual size 0,0715 millimeters. So ensure that your units are the same. All right. Then we get our magnification 100. Okay. I hope you're able to get that one. Right. Now let us proceed with our lesson. So now we want to look at our microorganisms one by one. So let's start with our bacteria. Okay, we can see there in our image, we have different types of our bacteria, right? We're saying these are organisms that are neither plant nor animal, right? And they belong to a kingdom that we called Monera. Remember, we started with the classification. Remember our classification from our grade 7. And then we're saying all the bacteria are unicellular, although some of them, they live together in colonies that are multicellular. I hope you remember these terms. And now let's look at our bacteria a bit closely there. We want to focus on some of the common ones that we know or we might have heard of. There's an interesting one there. It's written Vibrio cholerae. You can see that is responsible for the cholera. I believe you know about the cholera disease. Okay. And then we have another interesting one. Just a few names that you can pick there. We have Bacillus anthracis, which is responsible for anthrax. You know the disease anthrax. So these are some of the common ones. And if you take a look at these bacteria, I want you to take note something. They are actually named with reference to their shapes. You see the ones written Corsi there? You can see there, Corsi, these are spherical. Okay? Then the ones which have a rod-like shape, we refer to them as bacilli, like the Bacillus anthracis. And then we have those which are spiral there, which have got the different names there. All right, you learn about this later on when you do your life sciences. These are actually interesting things. So we know that our bacteria are unicellular. That is what we need to know for now. Okay, and then let us proceed to the protists. We have got different examples there of our protists. Okay, so when we look at our protists, we have some that are plant-like. Okay, so the plant-like protists, with reference to the one which we are familiar with, the algae, which we call the green algae, we're saying they produce their own food. Remember, we said some of the microorganisms, they produce their own food. Okay, so we have example there, the green algae there, they do produce their own food. And then we have the animal-like protists. Okay, these are consumers. They will catch and eat their own food. Okay, and then we're saying some of these protists, they can move using what we call the flagellum. Okay, and others have got short cilia. Right, these are finger-like, hair-like small structures. We don't want to talk much more about that at this stage. Okay, so these are some typical examples of your protists. Okay, and we're saying some they live in the bodies of animals, and then they can cause diseases, as we shall see which kind of diseases are caused by our protists. Right, and then we talk of fungi. I believe all of us, if not most of us, we have come across these two images. It might be at home, some rotten bread. It might be in the woods when you're going, especially during the rainy season when it is moist. We have come across these, and we're saying all these that you're seeing, they are fungi. Okay, they are caused by fungi, which is also a microorganism. Okay, and we're saying our fungi is related to both plants and animals. Okay, but they are also different from these groups. Okay, and we're saying your fungi, they are both unicellular. Remember, we said unicellular means one single celled. A typical example is the yeast, and then they can also be multicellular, with a typical example being the mushroom. Yes, you know now that your mushroom is a fungi. Okay, and then we're saying the most of the fungi, they grow on their food. Okay, on their food source. Okay, and what do? They form a spreading network of branches. We have seen that when the molds form on our bread, isn't it? You see that they form that spreading network of branches, and we call that network or branches hyphae. Okay, you can take note of that word hyphae. This is one word which you can be singing today, so that you remember. In our lesson today is something called hyphae linked to our fungi. So remember, those spreading filaments or branches of our fungi, we refer to them as our hyphae. Right, and we're saying the function of those hyphae is to secrete enzymes. I'm sure you're familiar with the enzymes, okay? And these enzymes are the ones that are going to break down our food so that they can be absorbed. Right, so this is what we know now about our fungi. We proceed to the next class, that is our viruses, okay? Typically, we have the HIV virus, hepatitis, influenza, so many kinds of viruses. The interesting one which we started with was the COVID-19. Remember, that is also our virus. And we're saying our viruses, they are also microscopic. We cannot see them. And what they do is they attack healthy cells in other living organisms, right? And we're saying they have the characteristics of both living and non-living things. And one of the major life processes that they do, that is reproduction. And as I said, remember, this is the class of microorganisms that sometimes scientists classify as non-living because they do not carry out most of the life processes. Okay, I hope you take note of that. So these are some of the typical examples. Just take a few there so that you can remember, just know a number of our viruses. Right, so looking at viruses, look at how they behave. If they approach a cell there, they're going to absorb on the surface of your cell, and then the next thing, what they do, they penetrate into the cell. Okay, Right. When they penetrate into our cell, they are going to multiply. Do you see your viruses entered there? It is multiplying, multiplying. Okay. And what does it do? In the end, this cell, this cell that has occupied the virus is going to be destroyed when your virus actually multiplies. Okay. And that will lead to our disease. Okay. And we're saying the cell now, the cell that is occupied by our viruses, we refer to it as a host. Remember when you hosted the World Cup in other countries, they come and live there and watch the football. In your country, you are the host. So what the viruses do, in order for them to reproduce, they also need a host. They come and live inside that host. Then they multiply inside that host. As they multiply, then they destroy that host cell. Okay? And to us as humans, we now have diseases as a result of hosting those viruses. I hope it is making sense. Right, now at this stage, we are going to do this activity. This is going to mark our last activity for our today. Right, for this activity, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Welcome back. Welcome back. Let us look at the questions together. So the first part they were saying a colony of bacteria is right from our part A there, from our column B. What do we know? We're saying our colony of bacteria, we said, is multicellular. It consists of a number of bacteria there, making it multicellular. Now we're saying our fungi consists of filaments called, remember this is the section that we touched on our fungi. We say that is called our hyphae. I'm sure that you're able to also get that one. Then take note there, we're saying the non-living microscopic particles that can cause disease. What are they called? We're saying it is none of these items. They are called what? It is the viruses, which we said they can be classified as non-living microorganisms. All right. Then an example of a fungus, we have the bread mold there and the yeast, and I'm sure you're able to identify that it is actually both A and B. And our last part, we were saying organisms that digest organic matter. These are what we call decomposers. Okay, though we did not talk much about them in our lesson for today. Right, now that being said, I'm just going to give you a minute for you to just summarize what you have there on our table. Right, just 1 minute. Right, welcome back. Welcome back. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, we are going to conclude our lesson here for today. Right. So remember what we covered in our lesson today. We said there are 4 different kinds of microorganisms. So number one, we're saying we have what? We have our viruses, which is said sometimes they are regarded as non-living because they do not carry out all of these life processes, save for reproduction. Right. Then we have the bacteria, which we say these are they're made of one cell only. They are unicellular. And then we also mentioned the fungi. Remember the typical examples that we gave of the fungi, the mold, the mushrooms, and the toadstool. And last but not least, we have our protists, okay? And we are saying these are made of one cell, okay? Now, this is just the general summary of our microorganisms. And remember, we said we cannot see them by the naked eye. And we said some of them can cause harm, they can cause diseases, and some of them can be useful. Right, now that being said, this brings us to the end of our lesson for today. I hope you found the lesson quite informative. Till we meet again, may God bless you.